About this time came evolution number 3, and all of a sudden we're still trying to speed production, we're still trying to cut costs, and we're still trying to eliminate workers to cut costs. And so now we're involved with evolution number 3, and we're going to talk about the advent of acid polish. And without any further ado, let's go right to video club selection number 4 and learn about this new phenomenon called acid polish.
People ask about constantly is acid polish. Now, normally in a glass cutting center like, say, Corning or maybe Toledo or somewhere in New York or wherever, there would be one company that would be subsidized by the other companies in that city that would set up an acid polishing shop, and they bore the brunt of the people that had to do this, but other people would bring things to them. And the way the thing worked, of course they didn't have air conditioning back then, but they would wire these pieces into a wire basket that was impervious to the acid, and they would tie the pieces down so they wouldn't be moved around. And they would go into this room where this vat of acid was, and it's a combination of sulfuric and hydrofluoric and who knows what, and it's really not important. And then 2 or 3 rinsing tanks right after that. And these men in rubber suits, and they had enormous fans on each end of the building, blowing the air through to try to keep it cool. And they would wear these heavy-duty rubber suits. They would wear goggles and gloves and boots, and every inch of their skin was covered. And it must have been 120 degrees inside the building in the summer, plus inside these rubber suits. The guys couldn't stand it very long. So they would go in. The foreman had to go in with them. He would blow his whistle, and they would put this basket of glass into the acid, but they didn't just put it in there. They had to shake it extremely vigorously while it was in the acid. Otherwise, the acid would cling to the glass, and they couldn't get it off in the rinsing procedure. After approximately 27 seconds, the old guys tell us, they would move it. In other words, the whistle would blow 2 times, and 27 seconds later it would blow again, and it would go immediately into the first rinsing bath, where they continued to shake it as hard as they could possibly shake it, and on through the second rinsing bath, and then the third rinsing bath, and then they would open the doors and run outside and try to get a breath of air. And it was very, very tedious. The point is, there was one of these plants, one of these Quonset hut tin sheds in each city, and this is the way they did it. In other words, they all pooled their resources to pay for this thing. Now, there are assets and there's liabilities again, just like with the figured and the blown blanks. The main assets of the acid polish is the speed. It took 27 seconds plus rinsing, plus going back over the major cuts with some polishing wheels to remove any acid residue that wasn't completely removed during the acid bath. And that would take perhaps maybe an hour or so, as opposed to the hand polished, the wood polished, going over the piece with the steel and carborundum wheels, and then the Craigslist stones, and then the wooden wheels, and then the felt wheels, and then finally the brushes, which might take for a piece, it could take a day to polish a piece really right. Okay, another asset to acid is that it saved the work of the polisher. Now, just before we learned that we saved the work of the rougher by having the figured blank, now we're saving the work of the polisher because he doesn't have to go back over all these pieces, and this was a labor-saving device, and they could cut some corners right there. Then the main, I think, asset to acid polish is acid polish will get in places where you can't get wooden wheels and felt wheels. And with the advent of the acid polish, we were able to have patterns that we couldn't have with wooden polish in the old hand traditional methods. And we will go over some of those in a later segment here. But acid polish was a distinct advantage in doing the tiny, small, intricate pieces, such as the Rex pattern that we looked at in video 2. That had to be done with acid because you just couldn't get into all those little tiny cross-hatched pieces and areas with the wooden and the felt wheels. Okay, now it produced sharper edges, and one of the things that I want to show you, and you'll excuse me just a moment while I get, if we could just stop the camera for a moment, I want to show you a little chart that has to do with the sharper edges that you get with acid as opposed to the wooden wheels. This chart shows you how a blank is affected by the normal, traditional, wood-polished method of polish as opposed to the acid. You start with the left with the steel wheel and or the carborundum wheel, and the black represents the wheel that comes down into the red area, which is the glass blank. And at first, when it comes down, this point is very sharp. Then the next thing, and each of these represents the same miter. As you see now, when the stone wheel comes down and also goes over this area becomes a little more rounded off, because no matter how precise you are, you can't come straight down into that thing without touching these corners. By the time they bring the wooden wheel down into it, the corner and the edge is rounded off even more so. And then finally with the felt wheel, it's almost rounded, and that's why we have the soft feel to the wood polished pieces. In a moment I will show you a wood polished piece and you will see what I mean. And I had a member of the Cut Glass Authenticity Committee argue with me one time that the sharper pieces were wood polished. Well, this just can't be. The acid attacks down in the grooves, but it also attacks everything uniformly, and it does not dull the sharp points. And if they are careful in their rinsing, and if they're careful as they polish over the major miters, it will remain sharp to the touch. So your softer, your more comfortable pieces, those that don't have the sharp jagged edges, are the ones that have the hand craftsmanship and so forth. So we have the assets to the acid polish being the speed, save the work of the polisher. You could do small, more intricate, detailed pieces, and there's the only liability, I suppose, would be the danger to the employees, and there was a tremendous amount of danger to the employees breathing those acid fumes. And another liability, perhaps you could consider the fact that it still does have to have some hand polish. And you can see on pieces from inferior companies where it appears there is a coating almost of Vaseline over the piece. In other words, you see little specks of something that is adhering to the glass inside the miters and perhaps even on the surface, and these are poorly rinsed pieces that have gone through the acid bath. And so you can tell a wood polished piece from an acid polished piece almost with a trained eye, almost with just a little bit of practice, because it's fairly easy to tell the difference. Okay.
All right, now that we've seen that on acid polish, let's look at the chart one more time and just review where we're at. Here's the evolution time. It's roughly the same time as the figured blanks. We don't know really which came first, but we just assume for purposes of our study here that this one came along about the same time, maybe a few years later. But the acid polish did allow for these things. You no longer needed the rougher or the polisher. You can now do dozens of pieces in seconds that previously would have taken days. And that is a major consideration. Cutting houses could now design far more detailed patterns because the acid goes down in all the little tiny areas and does work that they couldn't polish otherwise. And now they could produce the sharper pieces that the public seemed to fancy. I wanted